Hey everybody, welcome to the video. It's Wednesday, April 7th, and we're going to be breaking down this 10-game day slate that we have over on DraftKings. And if you find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, you know, the typical YouTube shenanigans. And if you want to help support the channel over on Patreon, link is down below for that. If you want to join the community of several hundred people, we got projections, optimizer, ownership projections, rankings, cheat sheets, data sheets, Discord community, and a bunch of other stuff as well. So links down below for that. The social media handles in the bottom right corner of your screen. And if you want to go over to Monkey Knife Fight and get a free money bonus up to $50, use code CPEN in the link down below for an instant deposit match up to $50. So check that out if you want. But I think that's it for the shameless plug. So without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as per usual, we will start with the pitching, and once again, it's another really good pitching slate. As yesterday, we had plenty of aces on the mound, and we got some really good ones once again. We have Shane Bieber, Trevor Bauer, the two Cy Young Award winners last year for the Kenta Maeda, Jack Flaherty, Ryu, Brandon Woodruff. I know they're not priced like Shane Bieber and Trevor Bauer, but they have ace-level talent as well, so it's going to be a good one. I am looking forward to it. And Shane Bieber and Trevor Bauer are my two favorite pitchers in baseball. Just from a fan perspective, not even DFS. I'm just excited to watch these guys pitch. But up top, we have Shane Bieber, $10,600, the most expensive pitcher on this slate, but it's deserved. The numbers he put up last year were absolutely astronomically good. He had a 1.63 ERA, a 2.04 xFIP, and a 41% strikeout rate. Limited the power as well. Didn't really give up too many home runs. Now, the matchup versus the Royals, I wouldn't say it's a cakewalk, but I'm not overly concerned about it. But they have had a good start to the season. Now, you got to keep in mind, they opened up with the Rangers, who don't have the best pitching staff in the world, and Shane Bieber is definitely a whole different kind of beast that they've faced so far. But they have a respectable lineup. They have Carlos Santana with Merrifield, Jorge Soler, Hunter Dozier. Obviously, they don't have Mondesi right now, which is a bit of a hit to their lineup, but they actually have some decent pieces there. I think Andrew Benintendi, if I didn't mention him yet, but it's a respectable lineup. So it's not like I'm really trying to pick on it, but anytime Shane Bieber's facing a team, I'm always going to give the advantage to him. He could easily have 10 plus strikeouts. I know he started off a little bit rocky versus the Tigers in his first start, and the velocity was down a little bit. Got to keep in mind, it was a really cold game. It was snowing, but he still racked up 12 strikeouts when it was all said and done, so there was nothing to really be too concerned about there. The swinging strikes and everything, all the peripherals look pretty good for Shane Bieber, so I don't see why he can't continue that great season that he had last year. Maybe he's not going to have a 2.04 xFIP with a sub-2 ERA and a 40% strikeout rate once again. But even if those numbers come down a little bit or go up a little bit, depending on what stat category you're looking at, that's still a very elite level pitcher, and he's got all the talent in the world. His stuff is great. So I like Shane Bieber, even though that the Royals had a decent start so far to the season. He's got a strikeout prop of 8 in Vegas, and there's no implied team total out yet for this game. But if I had to guess, I assume the Royals are going to be around 3.2 or lower. I can't imagine it's going to be much higher. Bieber's also playing at home, and the Royals aren't throwing out a very good pitcher in this game, so I wouldn't be surprised if the Indians could pick up a win to get that 4-point bonus over on DraftKings. So if you got the money for him, he is your ace of all the aces of this slate. And then Trevor Bauer, $10,200. I prefer going Bieber over Bauer if money isn't an issue. But if you have to go down to Bauer, I don't think it's going to be too much of a drop-off, although I don't feel as safe with him. But Oakland, it's not the best lineup in the world. They did lose Marcus Semien last year, and this is a very pitcher-friendly park for the most part. They only have a 3.78 implied team total, and he's a pretty heavy favorite here as well. And a 7.5 strikeout prop over in Vegas. And his numbers last year, they weren't quite Shane Bieber, but they were pretty darn good as well. 1.73 ERA paired with a 3.25 xFIP, which is quite a bit higher than his ERA, but a 3.25 xFIP is still very, very good. It just doesn't look as good when you had a 1.73 ERA, a strikeout rate of 36%, 143 ISO given up, a 159 batting average. Overall, the numbers are pretty darn good. Last year versus righties, the Oakland Athletics weren't really a team you'd want to pick on too much, but Dustin May had a very excellent start a couple starts ago versus the same Oakland squad, and I think Trevor Bauer is a more talented pitcher overall, so I feel like he can have a pretty solid game. His first start to the season, he faced the Rockies in Coors Field, which is no easy task. I know they don't have the best lineup these days, especially without having Nolan Arenado, but he had a no-hit bid, I think, all the way up into the 6th or 7th inning until he gave up a couple home runs, and the Rockies actually had 4 home runs in that inning. Fell apart a little bit there in the end, but we know he's a workhorse. He can go deep into the games. Now, know that he's on the Dodgers, that might be a bit of an issue. He's not going to be like where he's on Cleveland, where they'd let him go to 115, 120 some pitches back in the day, but still we know he's capable of doing that if need be. So Bauer, I like him, but he's my SP2, comparing him to Shane Bieber on this slate. And then dropping down to this mid-range here, I feel like all these guys are a bit underpriced, so it's going to make it pretty easy to fit in a Shane Bieber or a Trevor Bauer on the slate, whether it's in cash games or tournaments. I'm not personally wanting to roster both Bieber and Bauer together. I'd rather roster one of those guys paired with one of these mid-range pitchers. Now, you could go double mid-range if you really want to spend up on some bats, but the way this slate works out, I don't really think that might be the best strategy in the world. Although if you are playing like 150 lineups, it could make some sense if you want to get some heavy bats in your stacks. So I just kind of have to play around with that. But I do think in cash games and single entry formats or even 3-max formats, you're probably going to want to go with one of those really expensive pitchers paired with one of these mid-range guys. And we'll start with Kenta Maeda here at $8,300. He's already versus Detroit, so that is automatic interest, but it also helps when you're a pretty good pitcher as well. He had a mediocre start to start the season versus the Milwaukee Brewers, had 5 strikeouts, went around 90 pitches, so the pitch count was good, but it was overall kind of just a middle-of-the-road performance, had 5 strikeouts, but good matchup here versus Detroit. In last season, he had a 2.63 xFIP paired with a 32% K rate, good control as well, didn't give up too much power, and overall, the peripheral numbers were pretty strong, and Detroit only has a 3.53 implied team total here. He's a decent-sized favorite, and he's got a 6 strikeout prop over in Vegas, so I like Kenta Maeda quite a bit here. If you're looking at Detroit splits last season versus righties, it's some of the worst in the league. A 28.2% K rate, a low walk rate, low ISO, low average, low WRC plus, low WOBA. So Maeda checks all the boxes for me, and if you want to make him your #1 SP2 on the slate to pair with a guy like Shane Bieber, I have no issues with that whatsoever. Although a lot of these guys are some pretty good plays and they're cheaper as well, so it's kind of a mixed bag here. But I do like Maeda in all formats. It's just going to take me a little bit while in the morning and afternoon tomorrow to try to figure out and key in on who's actually going to be my SP2 to pair with Shane Bieber or Trevor Bauer, but I am leaning Shane Bieber. And then dropping down to a guy that had a really rough start versus Cincinnati to start the season, we have Jack Flaherty at $7,800, and my goodness, he did not start the season on the right foot. I mean, he threw almost 100 pitches, but he gave up 6 runs in that, only had 4 strikeouts, and had 0.4 fantasy points in Great American Small Park in Cincinnati. But this is a bit of a softer matchup here. It's also a much better pitcher's park than it is in Cincinnati. So I can definitely buy in on a bounce-back game for Jack Flaherty here. I like the park in Miami, like I mentioned. They only have a 3.73 implied team total against them. Kind of even for the win here, but a 7 strikeout prop over in Vegas. Last season, his numbers weren't super impressive. Now, I know you're going to see a lot of red bars here, but you got to keep in mind, we're comparing it to guys like Maeda, Bauer, Bieber, Ryu, and Woodruff. So someone's got to have the red bars here. If you put this with a larger sample size with some worse pitchers or just even some more mediocre pitchers, these numbers won't look that bad. So keep that in mind when you do see the red bars here. But he had a 4.91 ERA last year, which was pretty gross. It was only 40 innings pitched, but he had a better 3.42 xFIP, so he did get a bit unlucky in that category, close to a 30% strikeout rate. The walks were a little bit high, so that's a bit of an issue, but still barely gave up any power. Like a 140 ISO given up is pretty good. Again, it shows up red, but someone's got to be red here because there's just a nice slew of really good pitchers listed, but he just happens to have the worst numbers of these 5 or 6 guys that we have mentioned. But he doesn't give up a lot of fly balls. He's got a pretty high ground ball rate. They give up a 33% hard contact rate last year, but Miami's not a team that puts too much fear into me. And again, this is a good pitcher's park, so I like Flaherty at $7,800. Should have a bounce back game. Not sure what the ownership's going to look like because he obviously killed you last week if you happen to roster him on opening day. You got to have a short memory in DFS, and I like that price point quite a bit for a guy that's got around 30% strikeout rate and a decent matchup. Then Ryu here at $7,300 versus the Texas Rangers, who were really kind of the best stack to have yesterday, especially relative to their price points. Nate Lowe ended up having a really strong game. He had a double-dunk performance. Ronald Guzman went deep. Joey Gallo did nothing, which sucked. I think he walked, but that was just about it. Nick Solak stole a couple of bases and ended up having a pretty solid game because I think he got a run as well. But yeah, they were a really good stack. But versus a lefty here in Ryu, much better pitcher than Tanner Roark. So I'm definitely not going to be as excited as I was for the Ranger stack that I was yesterday, because Ryu is a pretty good pitcher, and I feel like he is massively underpriced here at $7,300. I know he's not the biggest strikeout guy where we're going to see a 30+% strikeout rate, but his numbers last season are very respectable. A 2.69 ERA, 3.32 xFIP, 26% K rate, good control, doesn't give up much power, gets a lot of ground balls. And the thing with Texas versus lefties is they really struggled versus lefties last year. Looking at their overall splits, they had a 26% K rate, 6% walk rate, a 142 ISO, a 74 WRC plus, and a WOBA below 280. And I was looking at their projected lineup, and they actually have the highest ranked strikeout rate in the league versus lefties with their current projected lineup. Obviously, things can change throughout the day when we see an actual lineup, but their projected lineup does strike out quite a bit, and they're like ranked dead last in almost every single category versus lefties. So we'll see how that goes. But Ryu at $7,300 looks like a very, very appealing option. Plus, they only have a 3.63 implied team total against him. He's a heavy favorite here, not the highest strikeout prop in the world, but that's fine with his price tag being this low. So he's viable in all formats. I think you could make a case for him in cash games as well. And then if you're going to go even cheaper, we have Brandon Woodruff on the road here in Wrigley Field. I was looking at the wind. Looks like it's going to be going across the field, so it's kind of neutral to hitting and pitching. So I think where all systems go for Brandon Woodruff here. And Freddie Peralta just got done carving up these Cubs, and I would say Brandon Woodruff's an upgraded version of Freddie Peralta. They didn't even score a run yesterday, and he had an overall pretty solid game. I want to say he scored around 25 fantasy points. Don't quote me on that, but I think it was in the 20s somewhere. But it's still a pretty good day for him, and at $7,200 for a guy with Woodruff's talent, he has over a 30% K rate. Just looking at the numbers last year, in a 73.2 inning sample size, 3.05 ERA, 3.29 xFIP, but 31% K rate. The walks were low, had a high ground ball rate, so I'm not too scared of the Cubs lineup here. I know Jock Peterson's got some lefty power, Anthony Rizzo, then Chris Bryant, Javier Baez obviously present you some power, as well as also Wilson Contreras. So I wouldn't say it's the easiest lineup in the world, but there's definitely strikeouts to be had, and Woodruff has the strikeout stuff, and you're mainly just buying in the price here for a guy that's as talented as he is, and he has a 7 strikeout prop over in Vegas as well. But that's going to be it for the pitching for the most part. Really good pitching slate. You can easily play these guys. You could go double mid-range. You could go expensive plus a mid-range and feel pretty good about your build either way. So with that being said, I think we should move on to the bats. So the one downside there is where there's a lot of good pitching on the slate, that usually means there's not as many good bats. And as you can see, this is a shorter list than usual, but there is a couple spots that I do like. So we're going to start up top with catcher. I only got 2 catchers here, a spin-up option and a cheap option, but we have Mitch Garver here at $4,400 facing a lefty in Matthew Boyd. Now, is Matthew Boyd a terrible pitcher? No, he just has some decent strikeout stuff, but he will give you a plenty. But he will give up a decent amount of power, especially to righties. Looking at his numbers last year overall, he gave up a 274 ISO paired with a 22% K rate. The strikeouts weren't really there last year, but in the past he has shown strikeout ability. Had a 6.71 ERA and an xFIP close to 5. So I'm really liking all these righties here on the Twins, and we got plenty of power righties here. So they actually profile pretty well here versus Matthew Boyd now, or Matt Boyd. I keep saying Matthew, call him Matt, whatever. It's just what's on my sheet, so I keep calling him that, his full name. I'm not sure if that sounds weird to you or not, but whatever. But anyway, Mitch Garver kind of sucked last year. I mean, he wasn't awful versus lefties. He still had a batting average above 300. It was only a 26 play appearance sample size. But he was not as good as he was in the previous season, because versus the lefties in 2019, he had like Nelson Cruz-like numbers, JD Martinez-like numbers. He was insane. I want to say it was like close to a 400 ISO versus lefties, just absolutely crushing them. Fell off a little bit last year, but again, smaller sample size, so I'm not really willing to put too much into it. But should be hitting in the middle of the order here. Plenty of pop versus left-handed pitching. I like the Twins righties, power righties, I should say, in this game. They have a team total of 4.47. Wouldn't be surprised if we see that climb a little bit by the time the game starts. So I like Mitch Garver quite a bit if you have the money, or if you're just stacking up the Twins. And if you need a cheap catcher, Omar Narvaez, $2,700. He's a guy that I always like to play versus righties for a couple of seasons now, and he's been paying off recently. The past 2 games, he has went deep in both. And I was looking at my lineup, so in my 3 max, I went with Kirk over Narvaez, and I originally had Narvaez in my lineup, and he homered, and obviously Kirk did absolutely nothing. I think he had 0 points. I would have came in like 2nd place in that lineup. Unfortunately, I still finished inside the top 10, but man, I was just really upset I took out Narvaez, because I had a Blue Jays and Rangers stack in there, so I figured why not just throw another Blue Jay bat in Kirk, but ended up not being the right decision. But anyway, Narvaez versus a righty, he makes plenty of sense. And we can see if he stays hot here versus Kyle Hendricks, who did not have a good start to the season. Now, he actually had a bit of a walking issue, which is not something we've really come to expect from Kyle Hendricks. So I'm not assuming he's just going to be a guy that walks a bunch of guys every single start this year, but it was definitely a concern. Wind's going to be neutral here, like I mentioned earlier, so it's not like we're going to get a big boost for bats. But Narvaez this cheap versus a righty, and he's been swinging a hot bat. I think he makes plenty of sense if you need a cheap spot at catcher, and there's not really any other cheap catchers I was in love with, but if something pops up later in the day, you can obviously play them. You don't have to be completely locked in on these two catchers as some become viable throughout the day. And then dropping down to first base, he's also eligible at third as well, but it's going to be Vlad, $5,000. I like the Blue Jays a lot. They're my number one stack on the slate as of right now. They're facing Kyle Gibson, who was awful in his first start. He got really beat up by the Royals early on, and it wasn't good for Kyle Gibson. And the Blue Jays lineup is pretty good. I know they don't have George Springer yet, but it's still a good lineup overall. Come on, Biggio, Bichette, who had a double dong performance last night. Hopefully you had him. I know I was super high on the Blue Jays on my video, but as the day progressed, they were grading out pretty well for me in projections, so I did bump them up. And I know they didn't do very well overall, but Bo Bichette was a guy that performed very, very well. Then you have Marcus Semien there and Teoscar Hernandez. Pretty good lineup overall. I'm very excited to see how they're going to perform once they get George Springer, because that'll be a very, very loaded offense. But Vlad, he's got power versus lefties and righties. I think we know that. Kyle Gibson, just not a great pitcher, and the Blue Jays have a team total of 4.87. Wouldn't be surprised if we see that close to 5 by the time first pitch happens. So I like the Blue Jays quite a bit, and you're going to see quite a few of them on, or I should say throughout this video. Miguel Sano, $3,900. He's just a power righty versus Matt Boyd. We kind of already mentioned that earlier. He will strike out a ton, but he is a ton of power versus lefty. So if he can at least make contact, I think he's got a decent chance of getting a home run here. Then Yoshi, just really cheap, leading off versus Nathan Eovaldi, who's not a terrible pitcher. He actually had some decent numbers last year, but I don't think he's someone we should like full on avoid. And I like that price tag quite a bit. And I wouldn't say there's a lot of amazing value bats on this slate, so if you just have to bite the bullet and play Yoshi at first just because he's dirt cheap and leading off versus a righty, so you have the platoon advantage there, he makes sense just for value purposes, but I wouldn't really go any further than that. Going down to second base, we have Marcus Semien for reasons I mentioned with Vlad. Now, does he have the power that Vlad has? No, absolutely not, but he's still a very solid piece to that offense, and he's going to be leading off, and I like the Blue Jays quite a bit, so I got to like their leadoff guys. He's going to have the most opportunities for the most part. So obviously, like Semien, he's fine versus both lefties and righties, and I love the spot versus Kyle Gibson. Jorge Polanco, $3,400. He's a switch hitter, so he'll be a righty here versus Matt Boyd. He actually had some better splits over the past couple of seasons versus right-handed pitching, but he still was fine versus lefties, and it's mainly just if you're stacking up the Twins or you just need a cheap option at second base, Jorge Polanco, I think, makes sense on what should be one of the better offenses to target on this slate. Then Colton Wong, $3,200. He's mainly just a cheap price play versus a righty in Wrigley. Not that the wind's blowing out or anything, but Kyle Hendricks was a little bit shaky in his first start. If we see that rust continue in this one, if Colton Wong can get on base, get a run, it's not the worst play in the world. $3,200. It's not my favorite play out there. He doesn't really offer you any power upside, but he's not a big strikeout guy, so he should at least make contact. And Kyle Hendricks isn't really a guy that misses too many bats anyway, so he's a fine contact hitter play for cheap. But again, this is going to be as far as I go. It's not something super exciting for me. It's just necessary value. And then going to third, I know I don't have any White Sox listed, but I do think they're a viable stack on this slate. It's just a lot of these guys are pretty expensive, so individually they don't grade out that well for me on a point per dollar basis, but you can certainly stack these guys up as they're a pretty darn good offense. And Justin Dunn, not the greatest pitcher out there. They don't have an implied team total, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see that coming close to 5 here. But Justin Dunn splits last year, or if you just want to look at the overall numbers, he's a righty on the mound, by the way. 45 inning sample size last season. He had a 4.34 ERA paired with a 6.23 xFIP, a strikeout rate below 20%, and a 15% walk rate with over a 220 ISO given up. Low batting average, but a lot of fly balls and a lot of hard contact as well, nearly a 40% hard contact rate. So I think you can definitely target these White Sox. Again, I said I don't have many listed here just because of the price points on a lot of these guys, but there's some good hitters in this lineup, and you can certainly target them. Moncada, he's got better splits versus righties anyway, so if you got the money for him, if you're just stacking up the White Sox, I like him in those formats. Probably wouldn't get there in cash games, though. Kevon Biggio, $4,700. I think he makes more sense in cash games than Moncada just because I have more interest in the Blue Jays and he's a little bit more affordable. Going to be hitting to the top of the order as well. And the Blue Jays got a team total close to 5. Again, would not be surprised if we see that get to 5 or maybe even past 5 by the time game time starts. The Texas Rangers bullpen isn't that great either, so they could potentially beat up on them, even though they kind of shut them down in the last game, maybe besides Bo Bichette. And then there was a stretch at the one part of that game where the Blue Jays put up a couple runs, but can't remember exactly who the pitcher that the mound was for that. But if we look at Biggio's numbers versus righties last year, not like amazing, but they're not terrible either. An ISO close to 200, a 333 on base percentage, 21% strikeout rate with a 13% walk rate, and a 45% fly ball rate. So if he can get the ball in the air versus Kyle Gibson, which I don't think is going to be the hardest thing to do in the world, I don't think he's a bad option. Plus, he's a very integral part of the Blue Jays stack, hitting that high in the order and one of the better bats in that lineup. Then Alec Bohm, if you need a cheap option, $3,100, is going to have the platoon advantage here versus David Peterson, the lefty. Not really looking to attack the Phillies too much here. They only have a team total of 4.35, but this is a guy that doesn't really strike out too much, and he did have plenty of power last year. Versus lefties, only an 11% strikeout rate. Keep in mind this is only a 43 plate appearance sample size, but a 243 ISO, 126 WRC plus, and a slugging of over 500. So Bohm at that price point should be hitting the top half of the order. I think he makes sense for value purposes if you need him, because we obviously can't spend up everywhere. But one position I'm more than likely going to spend up on, it's going to be Bo Bichette at $5,300 at shortstop. And he's the only shortstop I have listed here because looking at the other shortstops in this slate, I don't really like any of them now. I'm hoping throughout the day that something pops up for me that I like them. But as of right now, the only one I felt confident putting on a video or putting on the screen here is Bo Bichette. And it's not just because he went double dong last night. Even if he didn't, I'd still have some interest in him. But he's just by far, in my opinion, right now, the best play at shortstop here. So the utmost importance in my lineup right now, just to get Bo Bichette in my lineup and make sure that he can fit. So when I'm building my lineups, I'll get my 2 pitchers in first because I don't want to build around the bats and then just see what pitchers fit in last. I'm going to build around the pitchers, and then I'll probably plug in Bo Bichette and then probably Nelson Cruz when we get to that. The next guy we're going to talk about, but he just seems like he's far and away the best play at that position. Plenty of power last year versus lefties and righties. Over a 300 batting average, 353 WOBA, and a 211 ISO. So yeah, Bo Bichette, we know he's got plenty of upside, and I like him quite a bit. Plus, since he went double dong yesterday, he's going to definitely carry some ownership just because of that reason. Plus, Cal Gibson's not a pitcher that anyone should be too scared of. Then going down to the outfield, we have Nelson Cruz at $5,100. So the first series for the Twins, they were playing the NL, and they didn't have the DH. So Nelson Cruz just, he's not going to go out there and play defense, so he wasn't playing, but he's finally back in the AL, and he's went deep in both games so far versus the Detroit Tigers. I want to say he even had a grand slam. I'm not sure. He wasn't on the main slate, so I wasn't following it super closely, but I'm pretty sure Nelson Cruz does have at least 2 home runs to start the season in 2 games that he's played in, and he's facing a lefty on the mound, and we know Nelson Cruz is pretty much the premier lefty smasher in the entire league. Looking at the numbers last year, it's only a 51 plate appearance sample size, but I promise if you go back in his career, just even the last couple of seasons, these numbers I wouldn't say are too far off his actual numbers. Had a 586 WOBA last year versus lefties, a 442 ISO, 283 WRC plus. You guys get the idea. The guy's a monster, only a 7% strikeout rate as well. It's pretty good because a lot of these guys that have a ton of power, they're striking out around 25, 30% of the time. He's got some of the best, or maybe even the best power. I'd actually have to check the ISO numbers from last season, I guess AJ Pollock actually had a better ISO than Nelson Cruz on the screen here. But over the past couple of seasons, I guess I should put it in that perspective. He just has massive power numbers. He doesn't really strike out either. He's got a high walk rate. So love Nelson Cruz. If you can fit in Bo Bichette, Nelson Cruz in your lineups today, those are like the 2 guys I'd want to build around for the most part because he just absolutely murders left-handed pitching. And then Teoscar Hernandez, he has power versus both lefties and righties. He will strike out quite a bit, but he should be batting cleanup, and I like all the Blue Jays, so you're stacking them up. Wouldn't really make too much sense to leave him out of your stacks. I think he's fine as a one-off or even a cash play as well. Just is more expensive than he was yesterday, so it's not as easy to fit him in. Austin Meadows facing a righty. Ian Volpe will give up some power to left-handed bats, although I would not really want to picking on him too much, but I do think the Rays lefties are in play. And I know Meadows' numbers last season weren't great, but the year before that he was excellent for the Rays and had plenty of power versus righties. So I think Meadows is a fine option. He's got a couple home runs start the season, and he's pretty affordable as well at that mid $4,000 price range. Aaron Buxton, he could be leading off here versus a lefty, and I do like the twin stack quite a bit, so yeah, I think he makes sense. He's got that power speed combination upside that's always great for DFS or just regular fantasy purposes. AJ Pollock, $3,700. He's going to be facing a lefty in Oakland, which again, not a great hitter's park, but they still have one of the higher implied team totals on the slate. This is pretty much the best offense in baseball, and like I showed you guys earlier when we were talking about Nelson Cruz, Pollock's got some really good numbers versus left-handed pitching. Only a 60 plate appearance sample size last year, but had a 473 ISO, a WRC plus above 200, over an 800 slugging, and a 345 batting average. So he's just a fine, cheap / mid-range play if you happen to need a one-off guy. Because I'm not really looking to stack up the Dodgers just because I don't love the park, and I think there's better spots because a lot of those guys are expensive. Like Corey Seager, Mookie Betts, Cody Bellinger, Justin Turner. It's not really easy to stack them up most days. So AJ Pollock's a guy at that price point that I think is probably their best play point per dollar wise on the entire team. And then just to round it all out, we have Mitch Haniger at $3,600 facing a lefty. And he certainly has some upside here versus lefties. Now the problem with facing Dallas Keuchel is that he's a big ground ball guy, which I don't really like facing ground ball pitchers too much because it just kind of neutralizes your upside because it really reduces the amount of home runs you give up when you're not allowing to fly a ball. It was a 52% ground ball rate last year, only 0.28 home runs per 9 innings, and that's not just due to small sample size. You look at his career; he's a monster ground ball guy. So that's the only problem with facing him. He doesn't really strike out guys, but he just pitches the contact, gets those ground ball outs, and it happens to work. At a 1.99 ERA last year, a 3.9 xFIP, which was a lot higher than his ERA, but still, he had a decent season last season for sure in 63 innings pitched. So not really looking to pick on Keuchel, but Mitch Haniger does grade out well here leading off versus a lefty. But I think that's going to be it for the video, guys. So I do appreciate you watching or listening, whatever you do. So if you found this video helpful, please leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out. I really do appreciate it. If you want access to the projections, optimizer, ownership projections, rankings, cheat sheets, the list goes on and on. Discord chat, link is down below for that. The free money bonus to $50. Link down below for Monkey Knife Fight right next to the monkey emoji. You really can't miss it. Use code CPEN. Follow me on Twitter. Follow me on Instagram. Whatever you want to do. Doesn't matter to me, but I do appreciate if you do happen to. And that's going to be it. I'm going to stop rambling. Wherever you live, I hope the weather is wonderful. Enjoy your day. And we're getting closer to the weekend, which I know we're all excited for. But I'll see you guys in the next video.